The desert evening bled into gold and crimson. The sky stretched wide enough to hold every secret a heart could keep. Heat still clung to the earth, yet a cool wind drifted along the dry riverbed, carrying the smell of sage and dust. A lone figure lay half-hidden among the stones, her breathing shallow, her lips pale. Clara Mayfield's world had been narrowing for hours, vision fading to slivers of light and shadow. Her ankle throbbed with a fire that had spread through her leg, the gift of a rattlesnake that had struck just after midday. She had tried to call out, but her stepmother's back had only grown smaller against the horizon, the sound of hoofbeats retreating until nothing remained but the sighing wind. The earth pressed cool against Clara's cheek. She could taste the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, and hear the lonely cry of a hawk circling somewhere far above. Her stepmother's voice still echoed in her mind, sharp, dismissive, the kind of tone that made a soul shrink in on itself. Evelyn Mayfield had not looked back. She never did. Somewhere in the haze of pain and fever, Clara thought she saw movement, a shadow crossing the dying light. For a moment she wondered if it was death itself coming to carry her home. But the shadow solidified into a man on horseback, tall in the saddle, his hat brim dipping low to shield his eyes from the setting sun. The horse slowed, ears twitching, and the rider leaned forward as though sending trouble on the wind. Jacob Hollister had been riding the long trail back from town, dust thick on his coat, his mind set on a quiet supper and the slow comfort of his porch. But the pale shape by the riverbed pulled him from his thoughts. In the Wild West, a man learned to read the land like a letter, and this one told of something gone wrong. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching over dry stones, and knelt beside her. Her pulse was faint under his calloused fingers. His eyes, a shade somewhere between steel and storm, settled on the angry swelling at her ankle. No time for hesitation. He drew the knife from his belt, cut clean through the fabric of her dress at the wound, and pressed his lips against the puncture marks, drawing the venom and spitting it into the dust. It was an old trick, not perfect, but better than letting her fade without a fight. Clara stirred, her lashes fluttering against her cheek. She tried to form words, but all that came out was a soft murmur. He lifted her as if she weighed no more than a child, settling her across his horse with a gentleness that betrayed his rough exterior. The ride to the Hollister ranch was slow, careful, the dusk deepening into indigo. His land rose out of the plains like a quiet fortress, weathered boards, a porch that creaked when the wind touched it. He carried her inside, the door closing with a solid thud that seemed to keep the world at bay. Martha Hollister, his widowed sister-in-law, looked up from the stove with wide eyes. She was quick to act, fetching clean cloth and whiskey. Together, they worked in steady silence, binding the wound, cooling her fevered skin with damp cloths. Clara drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of their voices. A man's low, steady tone, a woman's quiet reassurance. When she woke fully, it was deep into the night. The fire burned low in the hearth, shadows dancing across the walls. She lay beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and sun. Her ankle throbbed, but the pain no longer reached up into her chest. The man sat in a chair near the bed, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze steady but unreadable. "You're safe here, miss," he said at last, voice quiet enough to feel like it belonged to the night itself. She wanted to ask why he had bothered, why he hadn't just left her there like the one who had abandoned her. But her throat felt raw, and the weight of exhaustion pressed her back into the pillow. Instead, she studied him. The set of his shoulders, the way his hands seemed built for work yet rested without threat. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of recovery. Martha brought her meals, old Ben Crowley, the ranch hand, offered her small jokes in his gravelly drawl, and the man called Jake kept to the edges, always nearby but never pressing. She found herself watching him from the porch as he moved about the ranch, the ease with which he handled a spooked horse, the patience in the way he repaired a broken fence. Her trust was a reluctant thing, worn thin by years under Evelyn's rule. She spoke little at first, offering only short answers to Martha's gentle questions. But each act of quiet care chipped away at the walls she had built. A cup of coffee left for her in the morning. A blanket draped over her shoulders when the evening wind turned sharp. Flowers, tiny white prairie blooms, set in a jar on the table without a word. It was one of those small acts that drew her story out. She told Martha first, her voice low, about the years after her father's death. How Evelyn's smile was only for others, never for her. How work filled every hour, and praise was as rare as rain in summer. How the snakebite had been an accident, but being left behind had not. Jake heard enough through the quiet walls of the ranch house to piece together the rest. He did not press for more. Instead, he made sure the chores near the porch kept him close enough to know if she needed anything. One afternoon, as Clara helped Martha hang washing, the sound of hoofbeats drew both women's eyes toward the yard. Evelyn Mayfield sat astride a sleek bay mare, two hard-eyed men flanking her. Her gaze swept over the ranch, cold and measuring, before settling on Clara. "So, this is where you've been hiding," she said, her voice smooth as polished steel. Clara's hands tightened on the damp sheet. Jake stepped from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, placing himself between Evelyn and the porch. "She's not hiding," he said, his tone steady. "She's staying." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You're stealing what's mine." "I'm not yours," Clara's voice trembled, but she made herself meet that gaze. "I never was." The air seemed to thicken. One of the men shifted in his saddle, his eyes flicking toward Jake's sidearm. Jake didn't move, didn't raise his voice. But something in his stillness made even the horses hesitate. Evelyn's smile turned brittle. "You'll regret this, both of you." With that, she wheeled her mare and rode off, the others following, dust curling in their wake. That night, the ranch felt too quiet. Clara couldn't shake the unease curling in her chest. Jake moved through the rooms like a man measuring shadows, checking locks, making sure the lanterns burned low. Neither of them spoke much, but when he paused near her chair before heading to his own room, his words settled like a promise. "You're safe here," he said again. But this time there was steel under the softness. The threat came sooner than either expected. 2 nights later, horses approached under the cover of darkness, the sound of hooves muffled in the dry earth. Clara woke to the creak of the porch boards, her heart slamming in her chest. Jake was already at the door, rifle in hand, old Ben a shadow at his shoulder. Evelyn's voice cut through the night. "I'm here for what's mine. Step aside." Jake stepped into the moonlight, the barrel of his rifle low but ready. "You ride away now, or you won't ride away at all." The men beside her shifted, unease in their posture. Clara, her pulse roaring in her ears, moved to stand behind Jake, her voice carrying farther than she thought possible. "I'm not going with you. I choose my life here." One of the men swung a leg over his saddle, but Jake fired into the dirt at his feet, the crack echoing off the hills. Dust flew, the horses startled, and Evelyn's mouth twisted into something between fury and defeat. She spun her mare and disappeared into the dark, her men trailing behind. Silence settled heavy, broken only by the soft sound of Clara's breath. Jake lowered the rifle, his shoulders easing. He turned to her, eyes searching, and for the first time she let herself meet them without fear. Something passed between them then. Not a grand declaration, but the steady understanding of two people who had chosen each other without needing to say the words. Weeks later, when the prairie grass turned green and the sky seemed wider than ever, Jake asked her to stay for good. The wedding was small, in the town's little chapel, Martha and Ben standing as witnesses. When they rode back to the ranch that evening, the land glowed in the fading light. Their hands brushed over the reins, a simple touch that carried more promise than any vow. And if you've ever wondered whether kindness can bloom in the hardest soil, I'd tell you this: it can and it will if you tend it steady. If this story found you out there somewhere, give it a like, leave a comment, and tell me where in the wide world you're watching from.